It's just a science project.
Silent breed is people!
You know, a doctor friend once said the same thing to me. Frankenstein was his name.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
That sounds like something out of science fiction.
Please explain to me the scientific nature of the whammy.
We live in a spaceship, dear.
So? Yes, science!
Program complete. Enter when ready.
Hello and welcome to episode 215 of Science on Top. Today is Tuesday, the 23rd of February, 2016. I'm Ed Brown and today I'm joined by Penny Dumsday.
Hello.
And Clinical Trials Coordinator in Radiation Oncology, Joanne Benhamu. Hi, Jo.
Hi, Ed. Hi, Penny.
Hi.
So we've got a fun little show coming up today. We've got brain parasites and chimpanzees, new ways of fighting cancer with cancer, and the Australian town that's consumed by hairy panic. Trust me, you'll want to stay and listen to that one. But, Penny, in a study of chimpanzees in the Ivory Coast, scientists estimated that each chimp ran a 30% risk of being attacked by a leopard every year. And now a new study published in the journal Current Biology suggests that may be because of a parasite that hacks their brains and makes them less fearful of big cats. It's our old friend Toxoplasma gondii, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is a parasite that most people are, not speaking terms, but familiar with, because it's that whole thing of pregnant women shouldn't change the cat litter because you might get this toxoplasmosis. It's a parasite that's actually pretty common in humans. I think some countries, 90% of people have it. I think in America I read it was about 11% of people. But anyone with a cat has probably had it. And
so it's a parasite that gets into the blood, into the brain.
Yeah.
It's been linked in women to suicide and depression, I think.
And aggressiveness too.
Okay.
And possibly, I think, in humans to an increased risk of schizophrenia. So it's quite an interesting parasite. And some of these things I think must be reasonably small. I know because of blood tests I have that I've had it, and I don't think I'm
aggressive or suicidal.
Particularly aggressive or suicidal, but I mean,
Are you a cat owner?
I was in my youth. I don't have a cat at the moment, but because when I got pregnant, I was tested for it and I found out I'd already had it. So I could have kept on changing the cat litter, but I told my husband when we were looking after the cat that I could not.
Look, it's always best to be safe.
Exactly. Anyway, so it's not just humans that can get this. This is a parasite that can get into anything, but it really needs felines. So it has to finish off its life cycle in a cat. So humans are just a way station, and if it ends up in something like a mouse or rat, it has a really interesting technique. It can change the brain chemistry of the mouse or rat so that instead of going away from cats, mice and rats smell cat urine and are like, oh, yeah, I'm going there. They go towards the cat, get eaten, and the parasite is then exactly where it wanted to be in the first place. So we know that it can change the rodents so that essentially they respond differently to the smell of a cat. But what about those chimps that you mentioned on the Ivory Coast? Because chimps are probably a little bit better for understanding what might happen to humans than mice and rats. So 33 captive chimps and 9 of them had toxoplasmosis, or they were infected with the parasite.
They were already infected. They didn't inject it as part of the experiment.
They were already infected. They didn't give it to them. So, but that seems to be roughly like, I mean, if in some countries 90% of humans are infected, it's not unusual.
Yeah, it's about a third of them.
So they dabbed leopard urine all around the chimps' fences, and the ones that were infected were more likely to go up to and investigate the urine more frequently than uninfected animals. So that suggests to the researchers that maybe the chimps became a bit more attracted to the urine than you'd expect, considering this is a predator that they're likely to get attacked by, a 30% chance per year. And that could be a byproduct of the infection. But it's interesting to think, well, what is actually going on here? Is it a rewiring of brain chemistry so that something, a pheromone that was previously repulsive all of a sudden became interesting. Is it just that the toxo has caused inflammation in the brain? So they're just generally acting weirdly?
Okay. So they're sort of a bit more reckless anyway because their brain is inflamed.
Yeah, and the other thing that is interesting is that the chimps seem to be reacting specifically to leopard urine. So they tested it with other kinds of urine. Human urine, and humans, we're not good final hosts, we're not cats. Human urine didn't seem to have that effect on the chimps. The infected and uninfected ones behaved normally. They didn't have any particular effect towards tiger urine, which don't live in Africa where the chimps are, or lions, which don't hunt chimps, which I didn't know that actually. Just leopards. So
yeah,
this seems weird, and I'm reading this bit of the Ed Yong article. He says this makes me less convinced that the team have found a genuine case of manipulation, because how could it be so specific?
Yeah. You'd think whatever brain chemistry it's changing is going to affect all felines.
Yeah, I mean...
the response to all felines, not just leopards.
Yeah, and if it gets into rodents, it does that to all felines.
Ah.
I suppose one element of it, which I guess makes it difficult to assess whether it's a true effect of the toxoplasmosis or not, is they don't have a comparison of the individual chimps' behaviours before and after infection. So could those particular 9 chimps have been more reckless anyway?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, which may be more likely to get them into a situation where they're exposed to toxo in the first place, maybe.
Well, either that or just their behaviour is more reckless because they're more reckless.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting, and it's a cool experiment to do anyway. I mean, not probably fun to the researchers to do, but I think it's interesting to be studying behaviour and all that. And if the link is true, and it quite possibly isn't, but it shows just how much we are governed by smell and chemistry without even realising it. Like, these are chimps that are capable of reasoning. They're not obviously as intelligent as us, but they can sort of know, hey, cat pee tends to be where the leopards are, I should stay away from that. You'd think they'd have developed that ability, but they're drawn to it anyway, maybe?
I think one of the things that I find interesting about this kind of story is, we've become much more interested, more, I suppose, from a popular science point of view these days with these kinds of stories, as well as things like stories about our gut bacteria and so on. And what I find interesting is that it's very difficult to tease out the complexities of those different things which may be influencing our behavior. So, you might get a story that comes out saying, well, your gut bacteria might be, affecting your behavior in this particular way. And then another story will come out talking about something like toxoplasmosis and how that might be affecting people's behavior. But overall, we are so consumed and covered in bacteria that it must be incredibly difficult for researchers to actually sort of tease out the effects of an individual type of bacteria in a particular group of species. Or does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it does. It's all of this is sort of a statistician's nightmare almost, because there are so many variables to behaviour. Human, primate, mammal, all of them, they're all complicated things. But I think it's still fascinating and very interesting. And if we can tease things out like this, I think you'd file in the probably not a link, but maybe, and it's interesting anyway sort of category.
Yeah, put this over here and we'll see what pans out.
Yeah. And obviously that's what science is. It's about amassing large volumes of evidence to draw a conclusion rather than just one little study here or whatever.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Penny, there's been an experiment running in Japan for over 60 years now. And it's starting now to unlock the secrets of fruit flies and how they're able to, see in the dark isn't quite right.
No, they're just learning what genetic changes might happen for fruit flies that have entirely lived in the dark. So what might happen to help a fruit fly cope with total darkness? So this experiment began in 1954 and has now been going for about 1,500 generations of fruit flies, which in evolutionary terms is not that long, but it's also not nothing. So,
It's a lot in human terms.
it's a lot in human terms for sure. So this is quite a long-term study, obviously. I mean, 61 years is a long time in human terms. The original ecologist who started it, SoT Mori, has passed on, and it's been taken over by another scientist. So these flies have lived in the dark for a very long time. What has changed? They seem to have longer head bristles, which are sensory organs. They seem to smell better. They're better at finding a mate in the dark than normal flies are. But funnily enough, or not funnily enough really, because it has been only 1,500 generations, they're still drawn to light, and they also retain their circadian cycles, which I think from my understanding is that circadian cycle, though, is a very deep-seated genetic thing. It's not just, every day the sun comes up, so, I think the human one resets to about 25 hours. Yeah.
But it's also, the human one is influenced by lots of things like melatonin levels, how much sun exposure we get and things like that. So I think that's interesting that there is that hardwired setting that is so deeply entrenched, even in fruit flies.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
So they're in the dark. They've sequenced the genome of the dark fly genome and found about 84 different genes that seem to be involved with, or that could possibly be, I should say, involved with survival in the dark. So things, especially the ones that are involved in smell, so sensing odours and chemicals and making pheromones or making those kind of communication hormones. It is a really interesting study. However, I think one of the problems with long-term studies is sometimes when they started, obviously people don't know how technology is going to evolve over the next 50, 60, 100 years, or they don't realise that the study is going to be a long-term study. So this one has suffered a few setbacks. The control group died in what I'm going to assume is a hideous incubator accident. So that's a shame because it means it's hard to tell if the alterations are due to genetic drift or,
Yeah.
A control group is usually a good thing to have. They also don't have samples of the DNA over time. So, ideally you'd think, well, wouldn't it be great to track the changes? But I'm thinking in 1954.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if someone had said to you, oh, and by the way, you'll be able to just sequence every single molecule in that genome for, pretty easily.
Yeah.
It's worth saving samples of the thing every couple of months. I think that would have seemed kind of far-fetched.
Yeah, cool.
So it's a really interesting study. Its future is in a bit of doubt because the scientist who's running it is not a permanent staff member at Kyoto University. I guess the problem is if you think this study is really interesting, you want to do it properly, it's still going to take 60 years to get to the point that these flies are now. Also, I shouldn't say do it properly. I mean, I'm not implying it's a not proper study. It's just stuff like the control group dying.
And to do it with a view to existing technological capabilities.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because it actually makes me think of the recent developments with gravitational waves. And, one of the fascinating things about that story was the way they talked about Einstein's belief that we would never actually be able to measure them, that we wouldn't actually have the capability to do that. And it shows you how what we can conceive as being possible in science, obviously one has to sort of operate within certain parameters and certain limits, but what we imagine to be capable now and the things that we may be able to do in 50 years, we probably would not have even thought were possible.
Oh, sorry. I think of all the space probes.
Yeah.
And if we could fit them out now, what they'd have on them. And, they'd be uploading photos to Instagram.
But also, I think it's easier to sort of not predict, but to use maths to sort of calculate where we're going to be with things like gravity and the cosmos. I think predicting how we're going to be able to interact with biology, which is in a way kind of more mysterious, is a little harder. Does that make sense, or am I just
No,
waffling?
I know what you mean, because it's easy for us to say, oh, my God, they should have kept the DNA. But look at epigenetics, which is really just starting to become like a big deal.
Yeah.
What else should they be
I-
getting? I don't know.
Or gut microbiome.
Something I actually have been sort of pondering recently is, how we always talk about, the whole thing of necessity being the mother of invention,
Yeah.
and particularly what we're facing now with climate change. I wonder how the way our world around us is going to change the science that is done and developments that will come as a result of that. I think that's going to be, troubling but interesting to watch.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so getting back to the fruit flies, I think it's also very cool when you get these long-term studies, and it reminds me of Richard Lesky's experiments where he's got E. coli bacteria that he's been preserving with like over 50,000 generations and growing them similar to this sort of thing, but just culturing them and seeing over time how they evolve and change. It's you take people who say, oh, well, we've never seen evolution happening. And then you show them these experiments. Like, that's exactly what we're looking at happening. Just because it doesn't involve monkeys and humans doesn't mean it's not evolution.
Ed, if humans evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys?
I can't. According to Shane Warne, it's aliens. But no, that's very, very cool. Well, Joe, the idea of injecting cancer cells into the bloodstream sounds a bit, counterintuitive, but it does make sense when you consider that these are specially modified cancer cells. Do you want to tell us about this really exciting treatment?
Absolutely. It is really exciting, although unfortunately even the researchers are not entirely sure that it'll actually eventually lead to a usable treatment. Essentially, one of the interesting things...
Sorry to interrupt, but that's the theme of tonight. It's interesting, but yeah, it's probably wrong. And then it's interesting, but the flies died and we don't have anything to gain from it. And now it's interesting to fight cancer with cancer, but it's probably never going to go anywhere.
Well,
why do we do this show?
Because science.
Because it's
interesting. No, look, the thing about this is that it does actually have potential. It's just that there are safety concerns. And essentially one of the things that's interesting about the way cancer behaves is that as cancer cells grow, they take advantage of their environment, and certain cancer cells use the circulatory system like a highway, and once they have access to blood vessels, they can actually travel around the body. Now, these cells are known as circulating tumor cells, and what they do is they leave the site of the primary tumor and go out into the body. And some of these actually will find a place to rest, and they form metastases. And then some of them actually make their way back into the tumors. And by doing that, it's literally like they've traveled a very long road and they've managed to battle their way through the body, through the immune system, and essentially they've survived that journey and are considered to be a lot more aggressive and stronger than the original tumor cells. And what they describe this as is called reseeding. And seeding itself is an interesting concept in oncology, actually. Just sort of as an aside, one of the things that is often a theoretical concern in cancer surgery is that a tumor can actually be seeded from the site as it's surgically removed, and that can then actually develop a cancer somewhere else. But anyway, that's just a little interesting aside there. What they've actually done here is the research team, which actually a husband and wife team and their colleagues, cultured different mouse cancer cells, and they tweaked the genetic codes, getting them to produce tumor necrosis factor, which is a powerful protein which has a number of different functions in the body, and it actually can be used to attack the blood vessels inside the tumors. What they did was they irradiated these modified cells so that once they were injected back into the body, they couldn't then grow out of control and grow new tumors elsewhere in the body. And they then injected them into mice with 3 different types of cancers. melanoma, breast cancer, or lung cancer. And they found that the tumors grew much slower in those rodents, and they formed fewer metastatic deposits of disease than the mice that didn't actually receive these injections. Now, what they've shown is essentially a proof of concept. But what's concerning is whether we can actually safely inject tumor cells back into patients, because even though this is theoretically a very exciting treatment, unless you can really demonstrate that by re-injecting these very powerful cancer cells, you're going to be able to really prevent them from being able to proliferate further and have the effect that you're wanting it to have.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess the next step would what sort of trials is this been in? This is just in the lab.
Only in mice.
Experiment.
Only in mice. They haven't.
Mice.
They haven't done anything in humans as yet.
Oh, bring some monkeys into it. Do some primate experiments. No, that's very cool. I love the idea of, well, as we keep saying, fighting cancer with cancer. I assume you'd have to have the cancer cells of the same type of cancer that you're trying to fight, do you? Or,
I would imagine so. To be honest, what I read didn't go into that in too much detail, but okay. I would imagine that would be part of the purpose of using these cells, that they would essentially extract this particular type of cell from the patient. So they would then sort of denature it from the properties that make it dangerous to the patient, and then re-inject it. So it combines a number of different elements of cancer therapy. But to be honest, I wasn't 100% clear on exactly how they would do that, whether they used the tumors from these particular mice, or whether they were other tumor cells that they'd modified and used them. Because I imagine that, given that they described the process whereby essentially these strengthened cells return to the original site, that possibly would play a factor in this. But I imagine that there would be other ways of getting these to target particular sites in the body.
It's extraordinary. And it shows that this is the thing with cancer, is there's never going to be a one solution to cancer. It's going to be this arsenal of different techniques for different cancers, for different stages of cancers. Radiation is going to work sometimes, otherwise you're going to need chemo, or we might progress to using this as a treatment with cancer versus cancer. But
absolutely, and that's what's so ludicrous about any claim of a single cancer cure, is that cancer is hundreds of different diseases that from the way, depending on where they are in the body, the different genetic makeup of the tumors, there are so many different presentations and stages. And if you look, for example, at we have in Australia, there's an excellent resource called EviQ, which is a repository of protocols for chemotherapy and other treatments for cancer, which clinicians can use to guide their practice. And if you look at that as an example, for the multitude of different cancers and different stages that those cancers present at, there are different treatments at every stage along the way, and that's what has been the battle of finding effective cancer treatments over the decades that scientists have been doing so, is teasing out the that in a particular group of patients, perhaps we, for example, when you look back at the original days of breast cancer therapy, breast cancer surgery, so essentially, William Halsted performed the first radical mastectomy for breast cancer, and subsequently it was shown that localized treatment, or what we now call a lumpectomy, is a much more effective treatment in women where the cancer has not actually spread any further. So for years there was a radical treatment that caused a lot of deformity in women, and nowadays we very rarely will carry out a radical mastectomy that takes out large amounts of tissue, because we've been able to demonstrate that in which group of patients there are better outcomes from doing a lumpectomy, or a lumpectomy with radiotherapy, or when a particular tumor that has a particular molecular profile might respond better to a particular type of chemotherapy. So it is just so incredibly complex and so so incredibly specialized. So, this, as an example of a treatment, this particular one here might be shown to have applications only in certain types of cancers.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating stuff, but I think just quickly, I think we ought to finish on the poor Australian town of Wangaratta in Victoria's northeast, which is battling hairy panic. Joe, do you want to tell us what hairy panic is? Because it's clogging up homes in Wangaratta.
Well, I have to say, the first time I read the story, I just was having a vision of, hairy armed tradesmen taking over the town, or I don't know, 70s disco stews with sort of low cut, white John Travolta style bell bottoms.
That's almost better than the actual story.
Well, I know.
Almost.
So hairy panic is a rapidly growing tumbleweed that is taking over the homes in a small Australian town, which, as you said, Wangaratta. Essentially, what's happened is, because of the very, very dry conditions in Wangaratta, these weeds pile up outside this particular group of homes to the point where they almost reach the ceilings, and the residents are having to spend hours each day trying to dispose of these weeds. And essentially it's come about apparently because a nearby farmer was failing to tend to his paddock. But
we've blamed it all on one guy.
One guy. And I mean, the thing is, it is actually very funny. And if you go and look at the pictures, you can just see these piles and piles of these weeds literally taking over these houses. But apparently, it can actually cause a fatal condition called yellow big head. I kid you not.
I'm not going to say anything nasty about the residents of Wangaratta.
Well, this comes about because sheep that eat it in large quantities can develop this condition, which I have to be honest, I'm not entirely clear what it is, but any condition called yellow big head, well.
I'm worried about my Google search history now if I type in yellow big head.
But interestingly, the residents of the town can't actually get any assistance from the local authorities to clean up the debris, because it doesn't actually cause any fire threat. Normally in Australia at this time of the year, we're so concerned about the threat of bushfires, and any sort of dry tinder or anything like that is a great worry. But and when you look at this stuff, you'd be surprised to see that it isn't a fire hazard, but certainly causing problems.
Well, you'd think it would be, especially since it's dry grass.
Well, it certainly looks like a Sisyphean task. I feel for these people. Like, can you imagine every day you walk outside, you clean up this stuff, everything looks great, you come back outside and it's literally like just piled up to the sky in front of you.
It's like snow plowing, only you don't have specialized machinery to get rid of it. We feel for you, residents of Wangaratta. But I think that just about wraps it up. It's always wonderful to have you on the show, Joe Benhamu.
Thank you, Ed. Always lovely to be here.
And where can people go to find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter on Joe Benhamu. And that's about it, really.
I will put a link to that and all the stories we talked about on the web at scienceontop.com/215. And it's also a good place to leave your feedback. Go to the website and let us know what we're doing right or wrong. Or you can send us an email, feedback@scienceontop.com, or catch us on social media. And great to have you on the show again, Penny.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back again next week, putting science on top of the agenda. Join us then.
I love robots, especially the super cute ones who are specialized for mobile manipulation, electrically powered and hydraulically actuated.
Don't we all?
We all do. That is how a new video describes the latest Atlas robot from Boston Dynamics. This video shows many things: walking through the door, getting hit with a hockey stick, which is the craziest part, because like in the robot apocalypse, who are the robots going to come forward first? The guy in the video, I think.
Yeah, I think we're going to pull it up here. Okay. Oh, man. It needs to be able to unlock doors, lift things, and yes, actually compensate for being pushed off balance, which is what you see when they hit it with a hockey stick, right? They want to make sure that it can compensate for balance.
I saw that a company in Boston built a 5'9" robot that can open doors and can actually get back up if it's punched. They didn't mean to test whether it can get up after being punched, but, well, it's Boston. So, I mean, not so tough, are you, Terminator? That's right, a company called Boston Dynamics has built a new robot that can walk just like a person and can even get back up if you knock it down. There's actually some more footage of where it even has a voice, so you can tell what it's thinking. Watch this.
I will pick up this box and place it on the shelf. The box is on the shelf. I will now pick up this box. I have picked up the... Damn it, Carl. Why would you do that? I just want to pick up the box. Seriously, Carl. Alright, no more fooling around. Just let me pick up the box. Thank you. Oh, damn it. That's what you get, a-hole.